Hey, my friends, welcome back to Embrace the Question. Happy New Year. It's January 6th, 2024, and only about 350 days, 55 days left until Christmas, so you better get started. We have snow on the ground here in Northwest Arkansas, and that's pretty rare for us. We get 2 or 3 snowfalls a year, usually. I would say that's average, and they don't typically hang around a long time, so we like snow. And it makes me feel personally a lot better about staying inside and staring at a computer screen. We are continuing with our Bible Study with Me series. We're in Exodus chapter 17, and this is not a very long chapter. In fact, it's quite short. However, there are some powerful precepts we need to pay attention to as we read this, because it's really easy to read right through it and not give it the thought that it deserves. So let's take a look at Exodus chapter 17. All right, Exodus 17, reading from the English Standard Version here. Let's just go for it. In verse 1, all of the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of Sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Again, pronounced Sin, if you look at your Hebrew concordance. Typically, I think the thought is that Sin was a town in Egypt, and the surrounding desert also was named by the town. Okay, so it's the wilderness of Sin. They're moving out by stages. Remember, a lot of people, 3 million people, that kind of mass doesn't move all at once. And we're going to discover as we move on that God is wanting to do things with sections of this congregation. And that's going to be really cool to see as we get there. But this is the first time we see it. Moving out in stages. Verse 2. Therefore, the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" This is where we get a sense that Moses is just an embattled figure. Everything is his fault. It's almost like they are testing God by roasting Moses, if you get the drift there. I mean, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? As if quarreling with me is testing the Lord. As if you're coming through me to get to the Lord. It seems that way to me. I've always paying attention to these phrases where Moses is saying, "You're testing the Lord," because I'm always wondering, okay, well, so how exactly are they testing the Lord? And I just really feel like they are using Moses instead of crying out to God, which God has never minded, by the way. He has never minded this personal interaction back and forth. It's when we do it proxy again, you'll notice that they're going to grumble. They're going to be grumbling about the lack of water. Non-productive. It just serves to propagate discontent, which God has less and less of a stomach for as they move forward. Okay. Verse 3, but the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" Listen, I don't know what it would be like to be in the desert in that way with such a congregation. I would have probably been one of the murmuring ones, the grumbling ones. You're in the desert. You've always had water, right? That's one thing they have in Egypt. They have water. They watered their slaves, or else you lose your slaves quickly. So they've moved into a place of utter dependence on God. They're in a wilderness that has no water. So I think I would be nervous, right? I would be afraid for my family. I would be afraid, well, there's 3 million of us. What if we happen upon some water and my family just never gets to the water hole? Maybe it's decimated. 3 million people plus livestock can drink a lot of water. We're talking about a major supply issue, right? You can also say, what kind of excuse does this crowd have when they're now eating manna off the ground and quail that are just roaming around the camp? All they want. Do they have a right to be concerned about water? It says they thirsted there for water. Did they have other options? They thirsted for water. Did they have other things that they just weren't thirsty for? I'm stretching here. They had goat's milk, I'm sure, maybe even camel milk. I don't know what the extent of their options were, but we're talking about a basic necessity in the desert, right? They're just thirsty, and I think maybe I would have to give these guys a break because I'm afraid I would be this way too. I'm afraid that I would. Okay, verse 4. So Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They're almost ready to stone me." What's interesting about that? The law hasn't been given yet. We have no official record of stoning as a form of punishment until the law is given. And yet, here they are. We know that they are already using it as a form of punishment. So it is a cultural thing, not necessarily something that appeared with the law. All right, verse 5. And the Lord said to Moses, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go." Verse 6, "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" So this is the test. Is the Lord among us or isn't he? Remember, manna on the ground, quail flopping around in front of your tent. Pillar of cloud in the daytime, pillar of fire at night, at least when they're moving. When we get in a bind, we tend to forget or get blinded to those signs that God is with us all the time. All the time. Now, there's another thing here of note, and that is the rock. Let's talk about the rock for a moment. He's going to strike the rock. You know this story likely. And that this is what gets Moses in trouble later on, right? Let's take a look at 1 Corinthians 4, or 10, verse 4. Let's just start with verse 1 and read a little bit of 1 Corinthians 10 because this ties right in. Okay, Paul is speaking here, and he's talking to the church at Corinth, and he says, "For I don't want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud. They all passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses." What does he mean by that? He means into the law, because Moses was synonymous with the law that came through him. John 1. All right. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, manna, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Now, that's interesting. The rock is Christ, so now we've stricken the rock, and out from the rock comes water, enough to satisfy everybody's thirst. All the households, all the livestock, everything. 3 million plus, goodness knows how many livestock. We're talking about a river here, not a trickle. We're talking about a major issuing forth from this rock. Okay. Nevertheless, verse 5, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now, these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. What was the evil they were desiring? Why did you take us out of Egypt? Bring us back to Egypt. Let's go back to the way we were. Let's go back into bondage so that we at least know where our next meal is coming from, even if we have no freedom. That is evil in the sight of God. All right, there's a dozen different types of sermons we could preach from that. How much security are we willing to release in order to know that we get our apple and our oatmeal every day? We know it's going to be there. I may have to sign my life away, but at least I know my next meal is coming. So why a lot of people love prison. It's prison. They have zero freedoms, but they know where their next meal is coming from. That's a form of evil. It's got zero to do with faith and zero to do with relying on God. All right, back to Exodus 17. Verse 8, Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, this is our first mention of Joshua in Scripture, choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. All right, who is Hur? We know who Aaron is. It's thought that Hur is a relation to Miriam, Moses' sister, either maybe a son, maybe a husband, not really sure. But we know later that he is a grandfather of Bezalel, who is the one in charge of creating all the temple furniture, the tabernacle furniture. So he's probably, I'm going to say, an older man, probably if a relation to Miriam, then probably a husband. Okay, so he is helping Moses up the hill. He is a trustee if he's going with Moses and Aaron. So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. That's what we just read. But Amalek is a grandson of Esau, not one of, he's kind of broken away from the rest of Edom. And he has control of and claim over most of the desert in Sinai, most of the wilderness area that they're going through. Amalek has claimed it. So what's the big deal? It's just a desert. Well, the big deal is 3 million people, again, plus cattle. They wipe out any resources that could be there. Okay, we're talking about natural thinking. They are going to wipe out all the water holes. They are going to take advantage of any food they find. And by the way, when Amalek gets ready to move back into this area, because the seasons change and they want to move their cattle, they can't, because here's Israel. So Amalek doesn't like, even though they're related, they do not like Israel. And they've come out to fight against them. So that's happening. Joshua is already taking his place as a general. He is we know that the book of Joshua is full of the exploits of Joshua as a general of God. He is a very strategic person. He has a strategic mind. And he's celebrated as such. I understand that there are tactics that he employed that are still used today in warfare. Joshua is Moses's fist, so to speak. So Joshua will be doing all the heavy lifting. Moses is on the hill holding his staff up in the air. And you maybe remember the flannel board illustrations with the Moses figure holding his staff up above his head. And after a while, his hands get tired, right? His hands get heavy, as it's going to say here. So verse 10 or verse 11, whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. And whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary. So his arms are getting tired. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. All right, so this is an odd thing to witness. Those on the battlefield can look up and see Moses with the staff of God in his hands, and probably Aaron and Hur holding his arms up so that he can keep that thing in the air. So what gives with that? Well, let's finish this part and we'll talk about that a bit. Joshua, verse 13, overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. All right. A serious pronouncement by God. I'm going to utterly blot out the memory, not just Amalek, but all memory of him. That's a promise. And he wanted witnesses to this. He wanted Joshua to hear it, because God already knows Joshua will be taking the people further than Moses will be taking them. So let's get back to this banner. The idea of the staff in the air is a sign. It's a symbol of God and victory. And as long as we hold up the sign, we are victorious. As long as we can see it. Again, many messages on this, but there is something about holding up the sign of God in our most embattled moments. It's a reminder for everybody to see, not just those on the battlefield, but the enemy as well. Both crowds, both of the civilian crowds that are just looking on, hoping that their side wins. Then God says, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it. Write it as a memorial in a book. So Moses builds an altar, verse 15, and calls the name of it, the Lord is my banner. And that's a really good translation, a banner. The Lord is my book of remembrance, if you will. He's my book of remembrance. He is my symbol that Moses is holding up. Moses holding up the staff of God is a symbol, is a banner. The Lord is my banner. What's interesting about this to me is that the Lord is the banner. Yours may say Jehovah Nisi. Nisi, banner, sign, symbol, standard, even. Think flag. Think a flag. The Lord is my flag. He is my book of remembrance. All right, so to explain this a little bit differently, a standard is something, if you think maybe feudal times, a flag above a castle, that means that everybody in that castle submits to whatever that standard is. They all live by that standard. Whoever imposed that standard, they call the shots. Nobody else. Nobody else. Whoever's name or symbol or sign is on that flag, that's the boss. And so we have this idea that the Lord has set a standard and that he's the one that's going to keep it. The Lord is my standard. He's my banner. And so he's the one that will keep it. Write this as a memorial in a book and recite it to Joshua. I'm going to utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. The Lord is saying, I'm establishing something here. And while it's necessary for you to remember that I'm going to do it, I'm still going to do it, whether you remember it or not. I'm going to do it. It's my standard. You have to decide whether or not you're going to live under my standard or not. But it's my standard. It's very much what we have lost in this nation. We had at one time a constitution, right? And everybody lived by that standard. Now we have one half that wants to live by that standard, another half that wants to change it, divide it, do away with it altogether. And so we have two peoples feuding because nobody is unified under a standard anymore. All right. So Moses builds an altar and calls the name of it, "The Lord is my banner," Jehovah Nisi, saying, "A hand upon the throne of the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation." Notice, Moses caught it. This is the Lord's fight. He's going to do it. All we have to do is recognize this is the standard he has set, and we are going to carry it. We will be called by it. Joshua later, famously so, says, "As for me and my house, we're going to follow the Lord." I think I have that above my kitchen sink on a plaque. "As for me and my house, we will follow the Lord." That's the standard. And this is where it actually originated. Chapter 17. Well, like I said, that's a short chapter, but there's a lot in it we can discuss, a lot to meditate on. A lot of it is pretty new when you sit and stare at it long enough. It's like, I don't think I've ever noticed this aspect before. Lots of that in that chapter. But I hope you enjoyed it. Listen, get yourself some Solway coffee. I'm not going to quit putting this up for you guys. I just wanted you to see Solway, Solway coffee. It's for a mission in Solway Firth is what it's named for, but it's in Scotland, and it's to reach a people that have been through it, really, to just literally have had a lot of bad stuff happen, and they need to be reached with the love of God, and this will help reach those folks. All right. Hope you guys are having a great new year. I will see you next week when we tackle Exodus chapter 18. Peace.